And what is up, guys? So we are actually back with another deep dive today, continuing this week with another look at another very meta relevant Pokemon, one Pokemon that a lot of people are saying that if you have access to this Pokemon, it is a for sure pick for your team. That Pokemon is going to be none other than Tropius. So Tropius is, of course, in an awkward spot as is because it's a regional outside of the United States and outside of its region that it's native to. Unfortunately, you're not going to have very much luck catching one in the wild. The only way to actually get one of these bad boys is to actually trade with someone who's actually taken a trip to its region. So that kind of puts us in an awkward position, but if you have one, it's definitely considered to be one of the top Pokemon to choose from. Today we're going to figure out why. Tropius is actually going to be a grass and flying type Pokemon, maxing out at 1941 with 15s across the board on IVs. Now, I did at least try to hit a 1500 at 34.5 with a 0 on attack, 1 on defense, and 1 on stamina. Today I did get a comment about a sweet little tool that you can actually access to look at possible IV combinations that people have already run against these Pokemon. If you actually have a Tropius at level 30 with a 0 on attack, 15 defense, 15 stamina, you actually achieve a 1498. Now, while that's important, what this combination actually sets up for you is a max stat product for your Tropius itself. So the reason that I'm going with a max stat product is generally max stat product means that you're going to be able to push the absolute maximum amount of stats that you can out of that Pokemon. So that's kind of what I like to see. So to continue on, Tropius actually ranks second in bulk and second in stat product overall in terms of every Tempest Pokemon that is available. So out of 160 participants, that's pretty freaking good. To be ranked second, the only Pokemon that does better than Tropius is actually Steelix. And Steelix actually takes first in bulk and first in stat product. So, I mean, it's just crazy. Steelix is a monster all by itself, but Tropius is nothing to laugh at. So we actually are going to achieve a 68.39% potential out of our full stat balance there, which that is actually a really good number. Almost 70% potential is always great to see. That means that you're actually going to be getting a lot of your potential out of this Pokemon. You're not going to be sitting with a 1500 Pokemon in your box that's just not living up to its potential. Now, let's go ahead and move on to moves. So, we do actually have flying and grass type moves here. The only non-stab move is going to be Stomp, but that's not super important. So, Air Slash we actually have here going to be doing 3 energy and 3 damage per turn. You actually have Razor Leaf, which of course is the entire purpose that Tropius is even on this meta-relevant list. Razor Leaf going to be doing 2 energy per turn with a 6.5 damage per turn. As we've talked before, Razor Leaf is just a monster of a move. It's amazing in its own right, and it's going to make any Pokemon pretty relevant in the near future as long as it doesn't get nerfed or anything like that. So, moving on to our charge moves here, we actually have Stomp, the only non-stab move that we actually have. It's actually a normal type move, costing 40 energy, 55 damage every time you fire it off for a 1.38 damage per energy ratio. Now, these percentages that you do see on the side here, we'll go over those in just a second. Aerial Ace being our flying type charge move, 45 energy to fire, 55 damage for a 1.22 damage per energy. And then we actually have Leaf Blade with a 35 energy cost, 70 damage for a whopping 2.0 damage per energy ratio. So, as we've talked about in the past, that 2.0 right there is pretty freaking big. That's pretty phenomenal. These percentages on the side here. So, I ran several simulations using Tropius on pvpoke.com. If you go on there, you can actually look at all of the multiple Pokemon that you can put it up against, everything in the Tempest Cup. You can throw it up against all of those and see what kind of matchups you actually have. If you only took one charge move into the Tempest Cup, you actually have a chance of winning right here based on which charge move you take. Now, all of these are done with Razor Leaf. I didn't even attempt it with Air Slash just because I knew Razor Leaf was the entire purpose of Tropius being here. So, Stomp actually wins you 44.1% of matchups, Aerial Ace doing 46.6% of matchups, and 48% on Leaf Blade. Now, something that's very notable that we'll get into when we talk about our matchups in a little bit, Aerial Ace could actually be the ace in the hole, no pun intended, for Tropius, and we'll talk about that in a second. In all of our deep dive glory, let's actually go over our positives and our negatives here, starting with our negatives. So the first negative that I have is that Tropius is just difficult to obtain. So even if you have the option to trade someone for it, they're probably going to want something pretty hefty in return, because Tropius is really sought after, especially since the induction of PvP. It's been known to be very good in the Great League by itself, not even like completely outside of the Tempest League. It's amazing in the freaking Great League. So people are going to want something pretty hefty for it, and the ability to obtain it is really, really difficult unless you just have the option to just take a trip and go get one yourself. Our next negative is that it could end up being pretty costly, depending on how you want to build your Tropius. I, of course, would recommend Razor Leaf and Leaf Blade off the bat, considering that this wins you most matches, but Aerial Ace actually has a really good spot, and it's basically not needed, but it is a really, really nice addition. The problem to that is it's going to cost you 75 candy and 75,000 dust. And if you already have a hard time obtaining a Tropius, that pretty much means you're going to have to sink a ton of rare candies into this bad boy. That's not... Our last negative that we actually have for Tropius is that his weaknesses are fairly common in this cup here. So we actually have fire, flying, ice, and rock all as his weaknesses, which is kind of ridiculous. So Charizard's going to be actually to take up Tropius with minimal effort. Flying types like, I don't know, Skarmory, Altaria, those are going to be able to take Tropius with no big deal. Ice types like Pillow-Swine and Alolan Sandslash, which we talked about, and even rock types like Quagsire could have some play here, but being that we have Razor Leaf, you know, any kind of ground type is going to have a lot of issues as is. So it'd be kind of a toss-up. Maybe in the scenario where you already have Stone Edge charged up and you just throw it in on Tropius and toss it down. Maybe that works, but it's probably not a great idea. But those are some kind of negative connotations towards Tropius here. He does have quite a few weaknesses that are quite relevant in the cup itself. Next, let's actually move on to our positives here. So Razor Leaf is a huge positive. The fact that Tropius has access to Razor Leaf is honestly, in my opinion, the only reason that Tropius is even coming up. If he had a different grass type fast move, he probably wouldn't be nearly as good as he is. He would still have a place for sure because of his bulk, and his stat product is already really high. But Razor Leaf is really what tips him over and puts him in a #1 position for most wanted Pokemon in the cup. Our next positive is his huge stat product and his huge bulk here. Being second out of 160 participants is crazy. That's huge. This Pokemon has a bunch of bulk. It can tank a few hits. There were several sims, even with no shields, where even this guy was tanking a couple of super effective moves. Like, that's pretty huge. Usually you don't see that, but Tropius is definitely a trooper in that regard. Lastly, on our positives is we do have a couple of decent resistances here. Fighting, grass, ground, and water. So water is a pretty big one, considering that a lot of our ice type Pokemon in this cup are also going to be carrying water type moves. And even against the Mud Boys, you're going to be resisting most of their moves. Whiscash is kind of the outlier there, because Whiscash does have access to Blizzard. He can pull a fast one on you, but you're actually going to be doing quad effectiveness towards him in general, so not too big of a deal. Ground type resistance is always great. Grass type resistance is great. There's nothing that really Tropius fears in his resistances, because they're all very, very strong resistances. Now, on to our matchups. So this was kind of interesting, because if you look here, we should win roughly 50% of our matchups. And in my testing, even against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon, and yes, I'm including Tropius as well, up against himself, which is kind of why we were talking about Aerial Ace earlier, up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon, we're actually just flat out losing to 5 of the 10. And then we actually have a tie situation if you count Tropius as a mirror match, like complete mirror match, you're just going to tie. Although if you do carry Aerial Ace with you, which is why I think it's a decent option to go invest in, you can actually win that mirror match. So that's kind of important if you're looking to be facing other Tropiuses. Definitely think about putting Aerial Ace on your Tropius to handle that mirror match. It's very, very important. Lapras is the other one that we actually end up tying with, which is an interesting one because I feel like it's literally just the bulk that Lapras has, and then the fact that Lapras can turn around and use Ice-type moves against us is really what sets Lapras and Tropius into this, tie situation. So anyways, as far as losses, we do have a loss against Lugia, Jumpluff, Dugong, Altaria, and Regice here. So Regice is kind of expected, Dugong is kind of expected. Lugia is interesting, but I think it's mainly when you gear a Lugia with flying type moves, that's kind of where the Lugia gains a lot of bulk there. Jumpluff is also an interesting one. I wouldn't have expected it to lose to Jumpluff, but I think it's because Jumpluff has a unique set of resistances, maybe? Don't know. And then you have Tropius actually losing to Altaria. So that's an interesting one because having Sky Attack on your Altaria and just the insane energy gain that you're going to be getting from Dragon Breath is just it's just too much for Tropius, which that's a decent point because if you're planning like me, I don't have a Tropius. I have no way to get one. I highly doubt I'm going to find one before Tempest Cup comes up. So therefore, I'm going to be looking at how to counter Tropius, and having Altaria and knowing that it actually beats Tropius here, that's just great. That's good news for me. Now, what do we actually just completely win against? So we actually win against Steelix, we win against Claydol, and we can actually beat Lantern here. So beating Steelix is great because that means we actually take out the #1 stat product and #1 bulkiest Pokemon in the league. Claydol, not going to be very widely used, but it is an extremely bulky Pokemon, and I'm glad that Tropius actually has that one under his belt. Lantern, though, is the interesting one because a lot of people, especially in my comments, a lot of people have been requesting that we do electric-type Pokemon, and I think that a Alolan Graveler would probably be a decent one to look at to maybe counter Tropius because the electric typing and the rock typing may do very good against Tropius, but I haven't looked too much into Alolan Graveler, so I can't speak on that just yet, but we will definitely get to him because he's highly requested. That is actually going to be it for the deep dive today, guys. What position do I really think Tropius is good in? Well, I really like him as a lead, to be honest. Anything with Razor Leaf I feel like is a decent enough lead. It's just that you kind of have to play around that quad weakness to ice. Kind of have to play around with the weaknesses a little bit because if you go up against something and you say, well, I'm going to lead with Tropius because I know I can come out of the gate doing tons of damage, but then they lead with like a Legacy Lapras or they end up leading with like a Cloyster or something like that, you're going to get kind of put into a bind and it's going to be hard to claw your way back out of that. So I like Tropius in general. I think he's a very solid pick. If you have access to one, definitely go ahead and put it on your team. Invest in it to get it up to at least 1,500, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to invest in that extra move. But if you expect plenty of other Tropiuses to be there, I don't think it's a bad idea to maybe splurge and get that Aerial Ace because Tropius is going to be good for a while inside the Great League, so I don't foresee it being a bad investment. It'll be a good long-term investment, if anything. So that is actually it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Always remember that if you have a deep dive Pokemon in mind, please let me know down in the comments below, as I'm constantly looking through these things. I'm trying to record like 1 or 2 of these a day to kind of build up a little bit of a schedule for these, because I basically haven't gone out and actually played Pokemon Go in what feels like a week. I've literally been here doing research and recording these. Hopefully next month I'll be able to get a little bit of a head start on these. As soon as they release the cup, I'll be able to throw my spreadsheet up, get all that stuff done, and then go to town as quickly as I can. But anyways, Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until tomorrow for our next deep dive, I will catch you guys then.